Alrighty. Hello and welcome. I'm Maddie. I'm the coordinator for Colony Farm Park Association, and also joined by Julie, who's the coordinator for Minnekhada Park Association. And this bat webinar is a kickoff for some upcoming bat counts at Colony Farm and Minnekhada Parks, as well as bat counts throughout the province. And so we're offering this virtual presentation on BC bat basics. And we're really thrilled to have the BC annual bat count coordinators, Danielle, Dagenais, and Amy Mitchell joining us. And they're going to give a talk about BC bats and their biology, life cycle, threats, and the BC annual bat count. And just before we get going, some Zoom housekeeping. Amy is going to be monitoring the chat while Danielle gives the presentation. So if you have any questions as we go along, you can type them in the chat box, which you should be able to find at the bottom of your screen. And in order for your questions to appear to everybody, there's a blue little button beside two, and you need to select, it's set to panelists, but if you set it to panelists and attendees, then everybody can see your question and all of our answers. And we can answer questions throughout the talk, but after the talk, we'll also have a bit of a question period for both Danielle and Amy to answer any other questions. And now, before they get going, I will turn it over to Janet Antonio from the Pacific Parklands Foundation for welcome and land acknowledgement. And just at the end, we will give our contact info and some more information about getting involved with the bat counts and other stewardship events with the park associations. So stick around for the final slide to hear about that, and then we'll get into the questions now. Janet, turn it over to you.
Thank you, Maddie. And thank you for everyone who's here tonight. I know that there's a lot of people interested in bats. And so it is my honor to begin by acknowledging that we live and work on the ancestral homelands of the Coast Salish First Nations. And today I extend my gratitude and appreciation for the opportunity to hold this webinar on their shared traditional territories. I also wanted to take a moment just to introduce myself and the Pacific Parklands Foundation. I'm Janet Antonio, and I'm the executive director of the foundation. The foundation was started about 20 years ago, probably with people very much like everyone who's on the webinar tonight, people who love nature and who really valued the regional parks that we have here in Metro Vancouver. And so the foundation's sole purpose is to raise funds and support projects that help improve Metro Vancouver regional parks and to connect people with nature, to protect nature, and to expand our parklands. And tonight is especially interesting to me because the Pacific Parklands Foundation has supported projects in Minnekhada and Colony Farm Regional Parks for bat habitat. And I've also had Kayoshi, who's a very passionate volunteer, show me through both parks. And so I am really excited to be here today and wanted to thank Julie, Danielle, and Amy for what I'm sure is going to be a great presentation. And as well, Jeff is behind the scenes. He's our technical help. And so if you hear his voice, he is also sharing his evening with us. So thank you, Jeff. And then I will turn it over to Danielle. Here we go. I know she's on the way.
Okay, thank you so much, Janet and Maddie, so much. So I am Danielle Dagenais, and as it was mentioned, I'm the regional coordinator for the BC Community Bat Program. So my region extends north of Pemberton and goes all the way to Langley. And for those of you who just came on, my colleague Amy Mitchell, who is the coordinator for the Fraser Valley, is with us tonight, and she'll be monitoring the chat and answering any questions as I present. So let's get started. So bats are very fascinating animals. They are often grouped as one animal, but there is a ton of diversity, and they are actually the second largest group of mammals in the world. So there are over 1,400 species of bats worldwide. They vary in size from, if you got the video up, you can see here on my hand, the bumblebee bat has a wingspan of 13 centimeters. And it's shown right here on this person's finger, to the largest bat, which is a flying foxes, shown hanging on these trees here that have wingspans of over 6 feet. So if you stood up and spread your arms, for most people, the bat's wingspans would be bigger than that. So they are found throughout the world in every different types of environments, from deserts to rainforests. We even have a hot springs colony in the Dagenais in the Charlottes. But despite this, there's very little known about bats. And we often fear the unknown. Their nocturnal behavior, their small sizes for many species, their dark colors, their fast flight at night, just makes it so that lots of people just don't see the bats and notice them. But they are, in fact, actually one of the most common animals you'll find in urban areas. Throughout history, they've been portrayed negatively and giving lots of misconceptions. One of the most common things that people think about when I ask youth, especially at outreach programs, I'll say, what's the first thing that comes to mind? And they think of vampire bats. And it's true, we do have vampire species, but there are only 3 species. So as I mentioned, 1,400 species worldwide, and 3 of these are vampire bats. They are only found in Central and South America, so not in Transylvania. And they do feed on blood as their main meal. Occasionally, they have been reported to feed on humans, but they're going after livestock. Bats use echolocation, and there is an expression that you're blind as a bat. And this expression is probably brought about because of the use of echolocation. But in fact, bats are very good flyers and are able to use their eyes to navigate and to hunt for prey. So they use their echolocation to help them, but they also have very good eyesight and are sensitive to white light. So as they're flying around you, they're not trying to nest in your hair, and they're not trying to bother you. What they're doing is they're actually trying to help you. So as you are standing there breathing, if you've got heat coming off of you, insects are attracted to you. And so the bats that are flying around your head are actually helping you, not trying to nest in your hair. And this brings up the next misconception, is that the word nesting should not be associated with bats. So bats do not nest, they roost. So they don't build any material, they don't build anything to have their babies, they hang in an area. And so we call it roosting. They're not related to rodents, they're in a separate order completely, and they're more related to humans and other animals than they are to rodents. So bats should not be associated with the word nest or the word pest. So they are very important wildlife species and are protected under Wildlife Act. Before I talk more about our BC bats, I just wanted to talk about the fear of bats associated with diseases. So people assume that bats are dirty, filthy animals, and that they carry lots of diseases with them. And although they can carry some diseases, here in British Columbia, the only disease they can carry is rabies. And this disease is a very serious disease, and it should be known that bats can carry it. But the levels found in the population is a lot lower than most people would imagine. So less than 1% of our bat population actually carries the rabies virus. And so the threat of the rabies virus is very minimal, but it is there. And the problem is that we can't tell if a bat is rabid unless you kill it and dissect its brain to confirm it. And so we ask people to please respect bats like other wildlife. Keep your distance, never touch a bat with your bare hands, and watch it and respect it from a distance. Report any unusual behavior that you see, especially if you notice bats flying in the daytime, because they are nocturnal and they should not be out at this time. Bats are found in people's homes throughout the region, and there's a lot of concern that their poop, known as guano, is going to be very toxic and dangerous to their families. There's also a concern that it's very corrosive and that it'll wreck their structure as well. But guano is not toxic, it's non-corrosive. It actually makes a great fertilizer if you're able to collect it and use it in your gardens. This fear has some truth to it though, because guano has been reported to be associated with a disease known as histoplasmosis, found in eastern United States and eastern Canada. So you can see a map here with a purple region on the eastern side. This is where histoplasmosis is found, and it's associated with bird droppings and bat droppings. It's never been reported in the West. And so there is no fear of any diseases in BC associated with guano. But we still ask people to manage the guano on their property and to wear personal protective equipment such as a mask when cleaning it up, because it's often associated with rodent feces and looks very similar, and that can carry diseases. The last thing I wanted to touch is the pandemic. So bats have been wrongfully accused for causing the pandemic, and there's lots of news out there about how bad bats are. And there is no proof that bats have caused COVID. And it's very important that we separate things that are speculated versus things that are true. And so lots of research is being done to determine where the source of COVID came from. We may never know the answer, but as of right now, there's no confirmation that it came from bats, and they should not be associated with it until there's proof. So as I mentioned at the beginning of my talk, bats are very fascinating animals. They have all these very cool adaptations that make them very interesting to work with. They hibernate in the wintertime. They are the only mammal capable of true flight. Many of the species are fairly small in size, but they can live to be very old. So the oldest bat recorded in the world was 41 years old. They also have the ability to hang upside down for hours during the day without having a blood rush to their head. And as I mentioned, they use echolocation. But not only are they cool and fascinating animals, they are very important animals. Most people, when you ask about the benefits of bats and the services that they provide, will think about pollinating bats. And there are 500 plants around the world that are pollinated by bats. There are also 300 species of fruit that are eaten by bats. And those seeds are spread in areas where there's been cut blocks. It helps vegetation reseed in areas and helps with soil health and soil stability. But most of our bats help us with ecosystem services. And 70% of our bats around the world are eating insects as their main diet. They are saving farmers billions of dollars in the US with their corn and cotton industry alone. And worldwide studies show that bats are saving us trillions of dollars. And by saving trillions of dollars to the agricultural industry, this is reduced costs to pay to spray pesticides, as well as reduced costs because they have less crop loss as well. So they're out there eating insects. 70% of the bats, 900 species of bats, are eating insects. They're helping our forests, our farmers, our local gardens, as well as helping to control mosquitoes, which are a pest to us. But they also can carry diseases. They're vectors for diseases, and so they help control the spread of diseases in some areas as well. All of the bats that we have in Canada are insectivores. They only eat insects. So despite the thought that we have fruit-eating bats in the Okanagan, they only eat insects in Canada. One thing that a lot of people don't know about bats is their importance in helping with technological and medical advancements. So by studying the flight behavior of bats, echolocation of bats, as well as hibernation, their hibernation state, which I'll talk a little bit more in a bit, we've got lots of technical and medical advancements. So some examples are radar, sonar, ultrasound, drones, as well as medicine for blood clots. So those 3 species of vampire bats that I talked about previously are very important because they have helped with the production of draculin, which is used in the medicine to treat blood clots. around the world. So here in British Columbia, we have 15 species of bats. There are 2 other species that are highlighted with a white border, the cannon bat and the Brazilian free-tailed bat, also known as the Mexican free-tailed bat. That is found in the region only by acoustics. So we've heard their calls in the region, in certain regions in British Columbia, but we've never caught them in hand. And so as of now, there's 15 species identified in British Columbia. But because these bats are feared and little knowledge is known about them, they face many threats. And because of the threats that we have, 8 of our 15 species of bats are listed. So we have our blue listed species, which are in blue squares. We're concerned about their populations. 2 red listed species that are threatened, and 2 other species that are federally endangered. Before I talk about the threats that bats face, I want to talk about the life cycle of bats so that we can understand a little bit more about our BC bats before we get into our threats. So for bats, they have 4 main seasons, like our seasons, not our calendar seasons, but our literal seasons where we have a very short fall and a short spring, and typically a long summer and a long winter in most of the regions of British Columbia. So in the fall time is when the bats are moving from their summer habitat to their winter habitat, and they're migrating across the landscape. This is also a time where the female bats and the male bats get together and they copulate. And they have this swarming event, which is this dance in the sky. And there's an exchange of sperm. And the female keeps the sperm until springtime. So after their migration and swarming, they go into hibernation. This is a very long period, can last from October to October to March in British Columbia. Not all of our bats hibernate though. We do have 4 species of bats that do migrate. So if we're talking about all 17 potential species in British Columbia, we have 3 migratory species if you include the Mexican free-tailed bat. And they move down to the United States and down to Mexico. And then this silver-haired bat here is a migratory hibernator. So it is found in the lower mainland, hibernating mostly in people's wood piles. But it will move, it does migrate to the US as well. But we do get quite a few reports in the Tri-City areas as well as other areas of the lower mainland where the bats are hibernating in wood piles. So they come out of hibernation after a long sleep. Oops, wrong way. And they migrate to their summer habitat. And this is what's happening at the moment. Bats are just starting to settle into summer habitats. Some are still moving across the landscape at the moment. And this is a time where we often find bats roosting temporarily on people's properties. This big brown bat picture I took, this is a bat that stayed for 5 days above a doorway in South Vancouver on Marine Drive. And so this is a common place for them to hang out in the springtime. And then we move into summer. And in the last 2 weeks, the bat activity has increased in Vancouver. This is the active season. This is where you're going to find the bats, see the bats, interact with bats. This is when they're out there feeding and providing those ecosystem services to us. This is also a time where the female bats have now taken that sperm that they've stored and they impregnate themselves. They find a roost so that they can have their babies. So these roosts are often found in buildings, people's homes, outbuilding sheds, or in bat boxes. So throughout the summer, bats have one main goal, and that's to eat as much insects as they can possibly eat. And this is so that they can build those fat reserves to make it last through the winter time. The female bats have an additional goal where they need to grow a fetus, they need to produce milk to feed their young, and they also have to store that fat. So they're eating tons of insects, and it equates to about 1,000 insects per bat per night. So just to talk about those ecosystem services that I mentioned before that are saving billions of dollars to our farmers, studies have indicated that a little brown bat can eat 100 mosquito-sized insects every 15 minutes. And the study that calculated the ecosystem services of the cotton and corn industry in the States indicated that one roost of 150 female bats ate 1.3 million pest insects a year. So this was just looking at the pest insects. So they had other insects in their diets that summer, but 1.3 million of those were pests that were directly affecting crops in the United States. So I'm going to show you a video of a bat coming and eating an insect. And the call that you'll hear, so make sure you've got your volume on, is a call that Amy Mitchell recorded in the region. So the bat comes in and swoops in, and when they've got those larger insects, they catch it with their tail, they bring it up to their mouth, and they either consume it while they're flying, or they'll go to a tree and consume it. One thing that, another misconception about bats is how many young that bats have. So the females are out there eating as much insects to raise their young, and they only have one pup a year. And so they invest all their energy to produce a very large pup to try to increase its survival to winter. So it's when the pup is born, it's about 30% of a female's body weight, which is a very large baby. So that if you were to look at a human, we have our baby's about 5% of our body weight. If we had a baby that was 30% body weight, we're talking about a grade 1 student. So very large size. So very important that they've got enough fat to help produce that young. So now let's focus on winter, their other long season. So bats are asleep for a very long time. They've accumulated all that fat from eating insects to help them make it through the winter. They have all these very cool adaptations that help them to survive through that winter. So they lower their heart rate down significantly. They lower their body temperature. They lower that metabolism rate. And they seek cold, damp, dark areas to hibernate in. So this shows some bats here. This is taken by a colleague in Alberta of little brown bats inside a cave in Alberta. So they often seek cave areas. The dampness will help to reduce water loss. And in BC, they've also been reported roosting or hibernating, in trees as well as big root rods as well. So this poster here indicates that by February, they're running really low on reserves. And this is really important because they slowly are burning through their fat. They're waiting for the weather to come to turn. They're waiting for spring to hit, climate to get better, insects to come out, so that the females can impregnate themselves as soon as possible and give that young all the advantage that they can have. But one main threat that bats have is the winter time. So this is a natural threat that bats have, and winter is extremely hard on the pups. So they only have that one pup. But remember that they're born in the summertime. So they're born in June. And by the time August, September rolls around, they're already migrating to that hibernation site. And winter is really hard on those young. You have a very short window, 3 months approximately at most, to grow up, build enough fat to survive that first winter. So most of our young, unfortunately, do not make it through that first winter. Now, besides our natural threats of winter and predators, bats face other threats as well. So it should be noted that if that pup does survive that first winter, as I mentioned, they can live to be 41 years old because there are very few natural predators out there going after bats. So you do have the occasional owl attack, marten attack, squirrel attack, snakes. But these are all animals that take bats when the opportunity arises. They're not seeking bats as a major prey. The main predator that bats face are cats. So cats in urban areas are very bad if they're out there at sunset. Bats are coming low to the ground. They need to drink water after sleeping all day. And the cats are really good at catching them and bringing them home to their homeowners. So not only are they killing our bat population, but they also are causing bat encounters as well with humans. Other threats that bats face are the persecution and killing of bat roosts, bat exclusions, pesticides are a main one, as well as wind turbines greatly affect our migratory species. The biggest threat that bats face is habitat loss worldwide. And this is habitat loss through the destruction and alteration of habitats, but also through disturbances. And I want to point out this picture at the bottom with these people in the cave. So these are people caving. And if the bats are using this cave as a hibernacula, they're going to wake up if they're disturbed too much, and they're going to burn through that fat. And that can have grave consequences for that population of bats. And here we have white nose syndrome, another threat that brought on by humans. It's a fungus that's found in the caves and are affecting our hibernating bats. So not only do they face the challenge of trying to survive that winter and for the pups to get through, they have to go through human disturbances from caving, but now they also have white nose syndrome. So three main things that are affecting our bat populations in the wintertime. White nose syndrome continually spreads across North America. It was introduced in 2005, 2006, brought over from Europe. We're unsure exactly where the route was, but every year it traveled approximately for 200 kilometers a year, spreading through the eastern states and into Canada. So there's 33 states that currently have white nose syndrome, and 7 Canadian provinces. The Maritimes all the way to Manitoba is affected now. There is very slow recovery because of the one pup a year, and there is currently no cure for white nose syndrome. So what happens is the fungus is in the cave walls. It also likes that cold, damp, dark place where the bats like to hibernate. It finds the bat a very perfect medium to grow on, and it grows inside the skin of the bat. So you can imagine the disturbance of something growing in your body. It causes you to wake up. Typically in January and February in the eastern states, when it first hit, this is what they were seeing: a bunch of dead bats in the snow near hibernaculas. You can see the map here of the recent spread of white nose syndrome. So every color on this map represents a different year of the spread of the fungus. In 2016, it jumped to Washington State. It has been spreading through Washington State and has also made its way down to California. It is currently not detected in British Columbia, but it's very, very close to our border. The problem is that out east, bats have been studied. Their hibernation has been studied since the 70s. Scientists know where the bats are, where many of the populations are. They're able to track the spread of the white nose syndrome and the effects on the bat populations. Here in British Columbia, we have very little knowledge of where our bats are in the wintertime. And so we don't know how it's going to affect our bats. There are 12 species that are affected by white nose syndrome at the moment, but some of the Western species that are not found out east has not been exposed yet, and so we don't know how they're going to respond to the virus. The result has been that 3 bats in Canada, the little brown bat, which is found here in the Lower Mainland, the tricolored bat, and the northern long-eared myotis, found in BC but not in this location, have all been listed as endangered, as well as 2 US species. There are also 7 species of bats that are carriers of the fungus, and this includes a Mexican free-tailed bat as well as a silver-haired bat, which are 2 of our migratory species. The Brazilian free-tailed bats mostly roost down here. There's a huge population, millions of bats, and they can carry that up into British Columbia. We have recorded them acoustically, and so there is a fear that it is here. We just don't know that it's here. So here comes the BC Bat Community Program. A program started in 2012 in the Kootenays, as a pilot project and launched in 2014 across the province. And this was the response of bat biologists to understand where our bats are in BC. We need a way to save our bats. If white nose syndrome is going to get to British Columbia, we don't know what's going to happen to our bat population. There's a lot we don't know about our bat population. And so the goal is to monitor the bat population, help with the management of bats in BC, and provide guidance to people. Every year there's reports of people killing bats in roosts, excluding bats during the maternity season, which causes them to leave their pups and results in the death of all the babies in that roost, as well as contractors, roofers, pest control companies, hurting bats and destroying roosts as well. So lots of people don't know that bats are protected by the Wildlife Act. It's not a well-known thing, and so the program is there so that we can provide that information and work with people to help protect our bats. So we provide education to the public as well as contractors, and developed 4 programs. So there's the BC annual bat count, where we monitor our population, dead bat collection, which is used to monitor for white nose syndrome, as well as to learn more about our bats in the areas. Also used for research with graduate students. We have our spring guano collection. And then most recently, there's a bat-friendly community certificate that was developed by the program. There are currently 4 cities that are bat-friendly, including Delta and Richmond, which was Delta just became it this year. And this is an initiative to get municipalities on board to help protect our bats. So the BC annual bat count is done every summer from June 1st to August 5th. It involves surveys in June to determine how many females are in a roost, and then again, middle of July to determine how many pups were successfully raised. The surveys start at sunset and go for 1 hour. They're a visual count. And these red dots on this map shows you all the locations where bat counts are currently being done. So I became the regional coordinator 3 years ago, and at the time there was a handful of sites on the Lower Mainland. I only had 4 main sites in the Vancouver area, and I now have well over 100 sites in my region. So as the program grows, we learn more and more about our bats. And so here I'm going to play you a 2-minute video that talks about our annual bat counts. tried to turn off my video and I ended up pausing the video. So these annual bat counts are done for an hour. At the end of your 1 hour, you fill in the rest of the form with the number of bats that you've counted. We ideally, post-COVID, we try to have 2 counters at each exit and get an average number of bats. Obviously, there's always a little bit of error. And so this is for statistical purposes. And then data is submitted to myself, Vancouver at bcbats.ca, or my colleague Amy, or info at bcbats.ca, and it's shared with the province. So the annual bat counts provide long-term data so that we can monitor our populations and look at population trends. And in colony farms in Minnekhada, bats have were discovered back in the 90s. I believe Minnekhada was in 1995 and Colony Farms 1998. Both of these main roosts were discovered by Kiyoshi, who I believe is attending today. They have been monitored and counted in the past through other programs, stewardship programs, but with the BC annual bat count, they joined the program in 2016, which is just 2 years after it was launched across the province, which is great. So we have a few years of data already on these colonies. And again, this year they will be counted by the Colony Farms Park Association and the Minnekhada Park Association. So Colony Farms has these bat boxes. There's 3 of them on one side and 2 on the other side. And there's a bat condo as well on the property. And Minnekhada has a number of buildings. There's barns and stables that have a variety of different species roosting in them. So I just wanted to touch on our other programs just briefly that I mentioned. So there's the Dead Bat program where we ask people to report dead bats to the BC Bat Community Program. Not only to report them, but if you can, ideally preserve them so that they can be picked up and shipped to the Abbotsford lab. Necropsies are done from November 1st to May 31st to look for signs of white nose syndrome. Autopsies are done, or necropsies are done in the summertime when there's bat box mortalities to determine cause of death, and any mass die-offs as well. So any dead bat that is reported will be picked up. In the summertime, single dead bats may be picked up if we're in the area, but we have limited funding. And these ones often go to universities and to museums and used in other research.
Well, for research, here we go.
So if you find a dead bat, please call us and report it, or email. Basically wear gloves, wrap it in paper towel, put it in Ziploc bags, and you throw it in your freezer in a container to seal it off. And Amy or I will come and pick it up as soon as possible. And we also do the spring guano white nose syndrome surveillance. And so basically once the bats come back to the roost in the summertime, they start pooping, and you can put trays down. So this is a Guano Catcher that is underneath the boxes at Colony Farms that Kiyoshi built. So I believe he built all of these boxes as well as this guano tray. After a set amount of time of the bats being there, after the return from hibernation, we go and we collect the guano. So if anybody is helping with the monitoring of bats, or visiting the colony on Colony Farms, please do not disturb this Guano Catcher because it's collecting very important poop at the moment, and it will be collected by myself near the end of May, beginning of June. So things that you can do to help your bat population. So we've got the BC Bat Community Program out there for the last few years, advocating for bats. And we ask you guys to do the same. So coming to this outreach event and this webinar is great. You know, getting informed and educated about bats is awesome. And spreading that word and talking to people about the bat webinar, even just mentioning that you attended a bat webinar can start conversations with neighbors and friends, and then often leads to reports of roosts. And so as we want to monitor our bat population across the province, we're always asking people to report bat boxes and bat roosts that they have in buildings. So if you talk to people about bats, please send them our way if you hear that they have a bat box or a bat roost. And of course, there's always the opportunity to volunteer. So the BC Annual Bat Program is launching our annual bat count in less than a month. On June 1st, we'll be going out and doing our first bat counts. Bat counts are done north of Pemberton all the way to Hope. And so if you live in any of those regions or have any summer cabins out anywhere and you want to help, please contact myself or Amy to volunteer, and as well as get in touch with the Colony Farms Park Association or Minnekhada if you want to help with the roosts in those regions. So I'll leave this slide up so that you have that contact information, and I'm happy to answer any questions that you have that Amy has not addressed already.
Hi everyone, I'm Julie from Minnekhada Park Association. I'm just popping in here to help facilitate some of the Q&A. But before we get into that, I just wanted to thank everyone so much for coming out tonight. I know if you're local to the Tri-Cities, it ended up being a beautiful night, and I'm happy that you made the choice to stay inside tonight to learn a little bit more about bats. We do have our contact information on this slide for Minnekhada Park Association as well as Colony Farm Park Association. And as my friends on the webinar mentioned, we are starting bat counts in both of these parks, and we'd love to have volunteers from the community come out and join us for these and other stewardship activities throughout the summer and into the fall. So please follow us on social media or get in touch via email, and we'd love to hear from you. Okay, so I'm just going to take a little look at the chat. We've got about 15 minutes here, so if anybody does have a question, please feel free to pop it into the chat, and then Danielle and Amy can hopefully answer those questions. We have a question here. Do you come to schools to talk about bats? So looking to see if the BC Bat folks would be open to visiting kids groups and other locations to help spread the word about bats.
Yes, I have my own consulting company where I offer educational programs in schools. I also do summer camps, Girl Guides, Beavers. The school programs are based on the curriculum. And at the moment, I am part of an NSERC grant. And so programs can be delivered through that grant at no cost to the schools. Amy also does programs as well. And she also does turtle programs if you're interested in turtles as well as bats. So you can send us an email and we can provide you the details with that.
Thanks, Danielle. We have another question. Can you talk a bit more about bat acoustic monitoring conducted in BC and the Lower Mainland? What kinds of recorders do you use, and where is the best placement, habitats, height, etc.?
Yeah, I can talk a little bit about that. I don't know if Amy, you want to jump on and talk more about it. Amy does more monitoring than I do. So there's a simple EMT touch, which is a very small bat detector. I can go grab it in my bedroom to show you. But it plugs into the iPhone, and it's great for educational purposes. So it just records as you're out there, lets you know if bats are in the area. There are other larger bat detectors that are used for research purposes. One of the main developers is Titley, which is the Anabat. And then we also have Wildlife Acoustics, which does SM2-3 models. And those are detectors that can be placed out for longer periods of time. So you can leave it out for the whole summer and determine if bats are in the area. So determining presence, absence, as well as species, as well as determine if you have any species that are at risk to be protected. So yeah, I don't know if you have anything to add, Amy.
Sure. Yeah, that's been going on for about 5 years as well. So they divided basically all of North America into a bunch of different sections, and people try to survey those at a particular time of year. So they go a certain distance and cover certain quadrants. And then that's just that's going to go into a big database for all of North America, just to basically get presence absence of a bunch of different species and where they are. So yeah, there's kind of those two different versions of acoustic devices. So there's the ones that are active that you're looking at. That's great to have when you're doing a bat count, just see what's happening, see what species it might be, because each bat species has a slightly different frequency range that they have. So that can help you tell which in the area. Yeah, and then so that's more of an active thing. And then we have passive ones that we can just set in a location for like a week or so at a time, and then just find out, or even over all of winter, just to see what kind of bats are in the area at those times.
Thanks.
Thanks, Amy. We had a little bit of a conversation in the chat earlier, wondering if you guys can comment on how do you let the bats know or attract the bats to your bat house that you've recently put up?
So there's no way to attract a bat to a bat house. So the bats have to be in the region. They have to be able to find the bat house. Ways to try to attract it to use your bat house, bat box, is to make sure that it's designed appropriately. So there are lots of designs available online. There's lots that you can buy online or buy in stores that are not properly designed for the bat species in British Columbia. And so if you are interested in getting a bat box, you can send me an email. I'll provide you with a bunch of information, ask you if you've ever monitored bats in your backyard to see if you have bats there present, and then things to consider before installing a bat box. So there are lots of things that you can do to help your local bats, including gardening for bats, allowing large trees to stay on your property, providing other habitats than just those bat boxes. But if you're interested in learning about them, send me an email. I can provide you with a great email that would just overwhelm you with knowledge.
Okay, we've got a few more minutes left. So if anyone has any other question, feel free to just pop it in the chat. Otherwise, I think we'll say goodnight a little earlier. Danielle, what was your email? Is that something that we can share in the chat? I did share the contact form just on the BCBAT website, but if there's a direct contact you'd prefer.
It's Vancouver at bcbats with the s.ca. I can write it in there. I have to stop sharing to get to my chat.
Okay, and it looks like there aren't any more questions. I know that was a lot of information. I certainly learned a lot. So thanks again, Danielle and Amy, for providing all of this great information, and also to Pacific Parklands Foundation for supporting us to put on this webinar and with the technology.
Thank you, everybody, for coming out. And if you have any questions, or if you want to report anything to Amy or I, you can look us up